It's going to be the official start of fall. And as the big voice guy was just saying, it's a Wednesday, and we do this every Wednesday with Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. She's on the phone line with us this morning. Good morning, Claudia. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Not bad.
We're doing well.
Not bad. Beautiful morning here in upstate New York. And I guess there's a lot to continue to talk about. We've been fairly busy on the show over the past few days, and we're going to continue to be. A lot to get into. But one of the stories Rocco started to talk about this morning, and we didn't necessarily get into, but we have some questions for you on this. And this was a New York Post piece that we really were highlighting here this morning, and some quotes from you and a little bit about your opponent and maybe his background. So Rocco started to dig into it, and I'm going to give him the opportunity because you started it. I'm just kidding, Rocco.
Well, it's in the New York Post, so it made big headlines. Mm-hmm. But I, as you're well aware, and I wrote about the history of Louis Brindisi and a lot of the other things that were going on around Utica back in the all the way from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s. And there's a lot of history there. And it's fascinating to me. And as an Italian, I don't find it offensive or anti-Italian or inappropriate at all to bring this stuff up and discuss it. I actually, when I wrote the articles, I wrote about one of my family members, Jimmy LaDuca, who was part of the 1957 Appalachian Mafia raid up there that members of Utica organized crime or alleged organized crime were a part of as well. So to me, this is history. There's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot to think about when you look at this stuff. So having said that, my articles, and the part of the reason why I'm talking about it, my articles were kind of linked throughout the story as it references a memo that your campaign put out to the staffers, warning them about their safety possibly being at risk because of the family of your opponent, Anthony Brindisi. And it kind of highlights, I guess, that history, that past that I was talking about. So it mentions along the, as far as the memo, we haven't seen the memo ourselves, so it says it was obtained by the New York Post, but they wrote in their report that the memo cautions staffers not to go out at night alone, to be aware of strange cars, be alert to whether you're being followed, and examine your locks for tampering. So I guess my question would be, what kind of prompted this memo? Why is this something that just came up now? Was there anything that's been happening or anything that's going on that's of concern?
Yeah, let me first preface something with, I feel the same way you do. I actually feel personally offended by the comments made that these are somehow anti-Italian. I grew up in Utica area, New Hartford, right over the line. One of my dreams was to go to Italy and study. I loved art and architecture, and the first time I got to do that, I wanted to be an artist. I think that's been public. In 1981, I got to go in my first study group as a Colgate student in Italy. We traveled all over. We were mostly in Florence, mostly in Rome, Venice, and throughout all the regions of Siena, the entire northern, and all over Italy. It was a dream of mine, and I continued that. And I've been going to Italy, studying Italian language and culture since 1981, and that's even before many of you were born. I know, probably Rocco. And I was there last year a couple times. I have really good friends. I'm part of an Italian-American business exchange. And I am personally, I get a little offended when people assume just because someone's involved in some kind of criminal activity, and I find the term mob and mobster, I think assuming they're Italian, I think that's really unfair.
Right. Nothing that you pointed out.
I don't like those references. The Italian culture is so important in the history of humankind. Look at the Roman Empire, look at the Venetian Empire. I've spent the rest of a lot of my time between Italy and Croatia. That's where most of my life travels have been because of the beautiful culture, the food, everything about it. And I still am involved in an Italian-American cultural group called Ilica, which I've been involved with for many years. And they come here, I go to Italy, we were there, we're doing a business exchange. And so to me, to actually insult the Italian culture by claiming it somehow has to do with, Italian, I don't judge people by that. I think it's a terrible standard. We have a great culture here of Italian people. And just because somebody is Italian doesn't mean, I think it's kind of bigoted to assume that they somehow have some connection to organized crime.
Right.
There isn't ethnic group in the world that isn't somehow attached to organized crime. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has to do with, we have a lot of bad people in the world that get involved in crime. It has nothing to do with that.
So what does it have to do with that as far as the memo?
I think it's people, oh, well, I'm talking about generally crime. Here's the thing with the memo, and I didn't even know about it until yesterday, that there was a memo that was circulating about my staff. But it has been, as you know, a very aggressive campaign. Since the very beginning, the radical resist movement has come out. They were harassing me about town halls. It doesn't matter how many town halls I've done or open forums, whatever you want to call them. I've done over 30. I've done hundreds of, many hundreds of meetings throughout the district of all kinds. I've met with thousands of constituents in all the different offices personally. I'm going out. I'm going door to door. I'm doing everything every day. It's almost like 51st dates. I mean, the resist movement is how many town halls do I have to do before it's enough? And this is all, I think, really kind of like a bullying campaign by the resist movement. And then I've got Anthony Brindisi, who's running a campaign, based on his standards. He keeps saying, he runs these commercials saying I've raised taxes, which I've never done, that my entire campaign is I'm controlled by these donors and these Washington interests and all these people. And I think that people need to judge him by the same standard. And personally, what we have been through on our campaign is this has not happened to me. It did not happen in my first campaign. I had a tracker. But I have somebody that goes up and down my street. They've got my neighbors nervous. They follow my house, or they watch my house. They take video of me coming out in and out of my house. People have gone to my family business, to my employees, and called them. They've gone to their homes and tried to intimidate them and tell them terrible things about me and my family and, our business. And, people have gone. One of my staffers had his tires slashed. They're at both my businesses in Sherburne and my business in Clinton. They're at our campaign offices. I have trackers who are really, really aggressive who are coming after me.
So is that memo about that activity, or did it name your opponent?
So my death threats have been going on. I was at a routine ribbon cutting last year at a price rate down in Utica. It was a new price rate that came into what they call a food desert down in Utica. They invited me to come in and do the ribbon cutting. We have vets there. And I as I'm doing the ribbon cutting, I look up and there's Anthony Brindisi's brother, Andy Brindisi, the one who was, had his issues where he allegedly ran over some kid over on Lincoln Ave, and they turned around and ran back over him, and there he is taking pictures of me. And I was just like, what is Andy Brindisi taking pictures of me at just some routine ribbon cutting? But there's this constant, the campaign has gotten a lot more aggressive in terms of what you can call it intimidation. And then Anthony, I just think that we need to judge this campaign by the same standards. He says that I'm owned by my donors. All these people, many of them are just Washington groups that are interest groups. Here's a guy who has been part of Albany. I mean, he has been the most corrupt people in Albany, the special interests, all those people funded his campaign. He's been part of all that. I think we need to judge him by the same standards, and I think it's fair game that he continually comes out and says his own mentor is his father. He even said his brother. His father's probably his biggest donor, whether it was running for school board, assembly, now Congress. He even bought his house. He has a long record, his father, of arrests and suspicious criminal activity over decades. It's not just one time. It's been going over periods of time. Whether he was shooting at somebody on the street in Bleecker Street, whether he was charged with, felony drug trafficking, and there's been a lot going on. And I'm just saying it's fair game. If you want to look at the donors, the media has to look at donors. And I'm just being fair about it. And you have to, my staff is nervous. They read this stuff in the newspaper. They've read Rocco LaDuca's articles that he wrote over the time. And I personally have a good relationship with Anthony. I mean, we've worked in the assembly. But I got to be honest with you, when I stood up to Sheldon Silver back in 2012, while Anthony was busy trying to say, we don't need to go after Sheldon Silver because there's somebody better lined up from what I've heard, I don't agree with that. Sheldon Silver was corrupt, and I stood up to him. But believe me, when I went back to Albany after that, people were saying, you better be careful. You better not, you better be careful what you're going to do. They're going to do something to you. They're going to run you off the road. You can't go after powerful people like that. I mean, everybody was saying that to me. Then a year later, when I stood up to Ray Halberter in 2013 for the activities that he was